everybody, and welcome to a special radio edition of Charts with Dan. If you saw the video that I uploaded last week, I am on the road, traveling, visiting family, visiting my mom, and I don't have my usual setup. Now, last week I filmed a video sitting in the closet of my childhood bedroom. The setup just wasn't very good, and I figured half of the show is charts anyway, so why not just spare you the mess and the clutter of all my childhood things and just talk about the charts. So you're going to be looking at some logos and some charts. I'm still here, though, I promise. It's like the good old days. It's like the 1940s. So curl up with a glass of Ovaltine and let's go over some of the charts and a lot of the release date changes. We went over several of them last week. You can watch that video right now by clicking that little card that's up in the corner of your screen. But we're also going to recap some of that, and we've gotten some updates even since then, including today's big news about the latest global release plans for Christopher Nolan's Tenet. But before we get into any of that, I just wanted to take a quick moment to recognize a few people that sadly have passed away in the last few days, all of them with their own marks on the entertainment landscape. The first, of course, being Olivia de Havilland, one of the last stars of Hollywood's revered golden age. She was played Melanie most famously in Gone with the Wind. She was in many movies, a multiple Oscar winner. In addition to her film work, she also filed a landmark lawsuit that helped to take the claws out of the traditional Hollywood studio system. She sued Warner Brothers for attempting to keep her in her contract longer by saying that because she was declining roles that she didn't want, that this basically counted as a work stoppage and that she owed extra time on her contract. She took them to court. She won that lawsuit, and it really helped many other Hollywood stars to disentangle themselves from the very unwieldy contracts of the time. That's what studios used to do. They would lock you down for a certain length of time. She helped those stars to free themselves from these contracts that were often written on terms that were not very advantageous to those stars. So in addition to being one of the brightest stars of her time, also a lasting impact off the screen for Olivia de Havilland. Another death, unfortunately, not necessarily in the film world, but very much in the entertainment world. Regis Philbin, a fixture on television screens for decades, passed away just a couple days ago. For many people, he was known perhaps best for hosting Live with Regis and Kathy Lee, for being the original host of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, a late-night talk show guest, a late-night talk show host back in the 60s, just an ever-present face on the television screen for so many generations of people. Certainly a face that was in every American household at a certain point in time, and a true icon of television programming. Reportedly holds the Guinness World Record for most time on television. And then for fans of not just the horror genre, but also particularly for Nightmare on Elm Street fans, briefly also wanted to mention the passing of John Saxon, perhaps best known for his role as Heather Langenkamp's father in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. He made a few appearances there. He made an appearance in Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Also co-starred with Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon and in any number of other Hollywood films. Not a name, perhaps, that most people would know, but definitely a face that a lot of people know. Again, particularly fans of the horror genre. Always sad to see someone who's part of so many important films to so many different people pass away. So those three Hollywood names, Hollywood stars, very sad to see them go. The only consolation is that we have so much work from all of them to remember them by. So let's turn our attention to what happened at the box office this weekend. And instead of running down the full length of the top five, really the most notable story is that for the first time, maybe since the release of Trolls World Tour, even though there was no real data being taken then, we have a new release reportedly at the top of the box office. According to Deadline, Dave Franco's directorial debut, The Rental, was the number one film at the box office this weekend, taking in north of $400,000. As we have seen since we've gotten these numbers that have started to get reported. Now, again, these are still not being reported by the studios themselves. These are being collected by various sources. Deadline's been doing some great reporting to that effect. But this is the first time since we've had any of this data, since theaters shut down, that a new release and not a library film has been at the top of the box office. So that is a sign that, a tiny, tiny landmark that things may be inching back toward resumption of some form of business as usual. We are also seeing those signs overseas. As I mentioned last week, Peninsula, the sequel to Train to Busan, continues to do well in South Korea. It has crossed over $20 million there. So the first legitimate global or international box office hit since the beginning of this pandemic. And then, as I mentioned last week, many theaters in China are also opening, although with very strict, severe restrictions. We had some new films entering that marketplace this past weekend. Doolittle and Bloodshot both opened in China. Doolittle took in reportedly around $5 million. Bloodshot took in reportedly a little under $3 million. And then the rest of the top five was made up with library titles, one of which was Coco, which was a big a hit in China when it was released a few years ago, released back into the Chinese marketplace. These, of course, are far lower than the numbers that we would usually see from China for any release, Chinese or Hollywood. However, reportedly the grosses have been going up every day that the box office has been open. We are a long way from normal. I want to make that very clear. We are a long way from normal or even close to normal. But what we are seeing are some sparks of life at the box office as theaters begin to reopen with restrictions. Now, we are a little bit behind that curve here in the United States. We are still fighting an epic battle against this disease. So while our theaters are, the majority of them, particularly the indoor theaters, are closed, many overseas markets are open. And that led to an announcement today. Last week's show, we talked about the fact that Tenet was pulled from its release date. Well, we now have new release plans for Tenet, and it includes a plan to release the film to much of the rest of the world before the United States gets to see it. Now, we knew that this was coming. Warner Brothers essentially said that this is what the case was going to be when they pulled Tenet from its release date last week. But this also represents the most fully formed release strategy for any film that we've seen from a studio since theaters were shut down here in the United States back in March. So let's take a look at the outlines of the release plan for Tenet that Warner Brothers announced today, starting on August 26th. The first ones getting the film on August 26th include France, Italy, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and 20 other countries all around the world. The next day, on August 27th, Australia, New Zealand, Canada are neighbors to the north here in the United States. Germany and 15 other countries will get the film. On August 28th, Norway, Spain, Vietnam, and 5 other countries get the film. And then on September 3rd, select cities in the U.S., along with Kuwait and Qatar, get Tenet. Now, what does select U.S. cities mean? Well, while Warner Brothers didn't specify exactly, again, from their announcement last week, what we take this to mean is that cities in which theaters are open and it is deemed safe for movies to play will get Tenet. We know that AMC, all of the theater chains basically have vaguely set some point in August as a projected or a hopeful reopening date. We now have another date for Tenet, September 3rd, but not nationwide. That was the goal of Warner Brothers and Christopher Nolan from the beginning, was to get Tenet out in theaters nationwide to revive movie theaters. That goal will not be met. Tenet will not be released everywhere around the country. It will only be released in cities where it is deemed safe to do so, where movie theaters are open. And the quandary that a lot of people are going to find themselves in, I am a movie fan first and foremost, but I am also a movie critic. That is part of what my profession is. There's no real picture, a clear picture on critics, particularly critics that are based in Los Angeles and New York, as many of us are. If there will be any concession for that, surely, it's hard to imagine them doing a traditional press screening, because they're essentially just like a regular movie screening, only that you have invited members of the press. Plus, there's no telling if that would even be allowed to happen based on the status of the disease in Los Angeles, the status of reopening in New York City and elsewhere. So what you may see is critics who are either not able to see the film, have to travel to the nearest open city to see the film, or Warner Brothers having to make some concession to allow critics to see the film not in a theatrical environment. But given Christopher Nolan's feelings on the matter, I don't see that happening. So this is going to be very interesting from a critical perspective to see whether critics are allowed access to this film, whether you're going to see reviews, or whether it's really just going to be about the premiere. The other thing, obviously, that I'm sure Warner Brothers is going to be up all night about is piracy. That is always a risk, and let's face it, in today's world, a reality when you're talking about releasing at different countries at different times around the world. So a lot of things still to iron out. I'm very curious about the movie from a critical perspective, because obviously I would love to watch the film and review the film. Reviews are a big part of the component of growing a channel like this, especially as I'm just starting out. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that situation is worked out. But more importantly, it does seem like that at least some people here in the United States will get a chance to see the movie on September 3rd. Again, everything is built on sand at this point. But with the idea of select U.S. cities, that seems a little more firm because you're not committed to any one place. Looking at the rest of the schedule here, September 10th, Kazakhstan, Russia, and 2 other countries get the film. September 18th, Japan gets the film. And then still to be determined, China. No release date yet for China. Brazil, where the pandemic is sadly still in a very crisis level stage. South Africa, India, Mexico, much of Latin and South America. Many other countries still have no date for Tenet. So this is not even close to a global day and date release. And I don't think we're going to see anything like that for quite some time. But this is the latest strategy for Tenet with Warner Brothers. We will see how much of that sticks and how much of that changes. But I think that it's pretty safe to say, I'm more confident now to say that Tenet is going to open somewhere in the United States on September 3rd, just because you know that Warner Brothers wants to get it out there at some point. And when it's playing everywhere else around the world for a week or more before it plays here in the United States, I doubt that they will be as worried about the film leaking or spoilers leaking, because sadly that will have already happened because it's open in so many markets the week before. So let's look at the updated 2020 select movie release schedule. This looks like my second grade multiplication tables, because I was bad at multiplication in elementary school, and Hollywood has struggled with a consistent release schedule. So I made this a few weeks ago, but it is already, let's look at all the revisions here. So Unhinged has been moved indefinitely. We are going to update our countdown to new movies at the end of this episode, so stay tuned. There we have Tenet, which was set for August 12th. That has now been moved to September 3rd here in the United States in select cities. Antebellum, still, as of this taping currently, the next movie scheduled to be released in wide release nationwide. That will take over the countdown pretty soon. We'll see how that goes. Then we have Mulan, which was moved indefinitely last week. Bill and Ted Face the Music has now been moved to VOD and select theaters on September 1st. The New Mutants, a lot of people, myself included, I made a prediction that the New Mutants would drop on some kind of streaming platform and that they would announce a new date at Comic-Con. They did not. The New Mutants is sticking with August 28th. This was an update. A Quiet Place Part 2 has now been moved to April 23rd, 2021. The Conjuring 3, as we mentioned last week, has been moved to June 2021. The 2021, although if it wasn't out till 2021, I wouldn't be shocked. September 18th, The Kingsman still on the schedule. Candyman moved to October 16th. Wonder Woman 1984. Warner Brothers still has that dated for October 2nd. No move of that date yet. And then looking at a little bit later in the year, because some things are starting to get affected now here as well. Death on the Nile was scheduled for October 9th. That has been moved to October 23rd. Halloween Kills has been moved to next October 2021. As I mentioned, Candyman has now taken that slot. Now, these movies from November and December, a lot of them have yet to move. We still have release dates on the schedule for them. However, one of the big ones for the end of the year, Top Gun Maverick, Paramount pulled the trigger and moved that film to next July 2nd, 2021. So Top Gun Maverick, one of the films that had been pushed from this summer already to December, has now been pushed to next summer. So we're already starting to lose movies from the end of this year. How many more of these movies are going to be pushed? We just don't know at this point. let's move away from the theatrical market and what people are and aren't watching and when they might be watching, and let's see what people are watching right now as we run down a lot of the VOD services. Let's start, as always, with Amazon, where this list stays mostly the same. Trolls World Tour is at number 1. It displaces The King of Staten Island, which had been number 1 for a while. That bumps down to number 2. Then Game Night, still a popular choice for people who are quarantining or staying at home. Bad Boys for Life, Sonic the Hedgehog, The Gentleman, Jumanji The Next Level, Bloodshot, and The Addams Family, all holdovers. And then we have Mr. Jones, which was a new straight-to-VOD release. That is there at the number 10 spot. Looking at iTunes, The Rental is the number 1 rental/purchase on iTunes as well. So it's number 1 at the box office, also number 1 on iTunes. It released in both select theaters and VOD simultaneously. Then we have The Outpost, which had been the number 1 spot for a couple weeks there at number 2, followed by Trolls World Tour. The Invisible Man 2020 makes a return to the chart. Bad Boys for Life makes a return to the chart, as well as The High Note, A Nice Girl Like You, Rad, which is a BMX movie from the 80s, is there at number 8. I looked, it's not a 99-cent rental. It's just there. That's kind of rad that Rad is there. Then Archive, which was a holdover from last week, and The Gentleman there at number 10. So a big return to some of the 2020 movies that did get theatrical releases, coming back to the top 10 there on iTunes this week. And then let's look over on Netflix. The Kissing Booth 2 was a big premiere for Netflix this week. It was announced today that there was a third movie that was released or filmed secretly that is going to be released next year. So look for The Kissing Booth 3 at some point in 2021. Then Animal Crackers, which is got a lot of high-profile voice cast. John Krasinski and Emily Blunt, Ian McKellen, all voices in that movie. Did not see the inside of a movie theater, at least not here in the United States, but apparently seeing the inside of a lot of living rooms. Then we have the original Kissing Booth. I guess a lot of double features there. Then Ip Man 4, the finale, at number 4. The Old Guard, Charlize Theron's movie, still there in the top 5, followed by Holdovers, The Fatal Affair, Dr. Seuss's The Lorax, and How Do You Know at number 8. Offering to the Storm, which is another 2020 Netflix original, or at least distribution here in the United States original, at number 9. And then Despicable Me, which we've seen often on the chart all summer, there at number 10. Let's look at a flashback for what people were going to see at this point in the summer in years past. And this is a very 80s flashback. Princess Purple Rain debuted at number 1, followed by Ghostbusters at number 2, although Ghostbusters had been out for about 2 months at this point in its release schedule, but it was still competing for the number 1 spot at that point. And that's the kind of structure that we're going to start seeing come back, ironically. This idea of a movie that opens a little bit more slowly and then has a long tail. That's kind of the old way of doing things. That's going to be the return to what we're seeing, particularly with Tenet as it rolls out across the country, if this is going to be the release structure, if they are able to stick to this one. So what's old is new again as far as movie releases. Then at number 3, a re-release of Disney's The Jungle Book. Once again, how Disney got you to watch their cartoons before Disney+. Then Gremlins, which has been a top 10 movie just recently. There at number 4 in its initial release, and The Karate Kid, which according to some of the box office data that I was reading, it was number 2 this weekend at the box office, was number 5 this weekend back in 1984. So again, what's old is new again. A lot of these movies being re-released. Ghostbusters we've seen on the top 10 this summer. Gremlins, Karate Kid, a lot of these things from 1984 have been resurfacing. Just a kind of a testament to the enduring power of these films, that you can re-release them and that people will go back and see them. So the summer of 84, not looking too different, at least as far as a lot of the movies in the top 5 from the summer of 2020, although I don't think anybody could have seen that coming. Let's look at some other notable box office moments from this week in history, week 30. Back in 1994, has anyone had a better year than Jim Carrey? Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, The Mask continued Jim Carrey's breakout year back in 1994. 1995 was not a good year for Kevin Costner. The epic bomb, although it wasn't that much of a box office bomb, it certainly wasn't a huge success, and it inspired a great stunt show at Universal Studios. But this week in 1995, Waterworld opened at number 1, and a true classic of the 90s, Sandra Bullock's The Net, opened at number 2. Then in 1998, Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan opened at number 1. That was a big box office success before its Oscar was stolen by Shakespeare in Love. That is something that I am obviously still very much not over. And then in 2004, probably not a weekend to remember for Halle Berry, Catwoman opened back in 2004, the classic Pitoff film. One word, director of the film, Pitoff. So let's wrap up the show by talking about our 2 countdowns. And there's some changes here, and then we have a very interesting thing to discuss that I mentioned briefly last week when we were talking about all the release date changes. The countdown to new movies, we would have been at 4 days. Unhinged was supposed to open this weekend. However, its release date has changed. The counter flips back, and we are now at 25 days. 25 days until Antebellum, which is the next movie currently on the release schedule for nationwide release, is now the one we are counting down towards. So we add 3 weeks to the countdown to new movies. This number's been going up and down, up and down, up and down. We're back up to 25. We were down into single digits, no longer. So Unhinged has been bumped to a TBD release date in August, and Antebellum is now the film that we are counting down towards. But there's a very interesting possibility, and it involves our other countdown, and that is the countdown to The New Mutants, which stands at 32 days. They're sticking to their guns. They're saying that they're coming out on August 28th. We are now almost just a hair over a month away from the release of New Mutants. Well, what's so interesting about that? Well, if Antebellum pushes its release date, then the New Mutants could be the first movie released nationwide when theaters shut down. The movie whose release date has been pushed more than any other movie that people said would never come out now has a legitimate shot at being the first nationwide release following this pandemic. And really, was there ever any other way for this story to end? You know, I mentioned that there's one of 2 possibilities. One of them is that the 2 countdowns merge and that it becomes a countdown singularity that will destroy the universe and the world, which it seems like perhaps we've been on that road for a while now. But so perhaps that is just the end to the story that we've been writing all along. However, I think this could be one of the best slow clap moments in movie history. If New Mutants is able to become the first new nationwide release to help usher in a safe era of film going once again, if that becomes the beacon of hope for people in areas where it is deemed okay to go to the movies, if it becomes the first film that they see in a theater for many, many months, doesn't that seem like the most Rudy-esque ending for this movie of all time? So, really, we are faced with 2 different scenarios here. Number 1, this is a heartwarming story of a movie that fought against all odds and ended up being in a position where, even if it's not great, it's going to be revered and remembered as the movie that people finally were able to go back and see once it was safe for them to go back to the theater. Or it's going to destroy the world. Either one would be interesting. So keep an eye on the news, look for Antebellum, see if that film is going to move off its release date. Because if Antebellum moves off its release date and The New Mutant stays, then our 2 countdowns will officially merge. And then, oh boy, folks, things are going to get really, really interesting. However, that is many, many steps down the line, and as I mentioned so many times before, this is covering news. This is talking about box office, even though there's not a lot of box office to talk about. But you know, this is also keeping in context with what's actually happening here. Obviously, whether or not a movie about X-Men coming out is not the most important thing happening in the world right now. And yes, that release date should be pushed if it's deemed unsafe to do so. However, this is what I do. This is what I do. This is what I like to do. And yes, I certainly do have a hope for a future very soon where some form of safe movie going resumes, because that would be an indication that some form of many aspects of everyone's lives are going to resume. This has not been an easy few months for anyone around the world, inside the entertainment industry, outside the entertainment industry, inside and outside the United States. This has been one hell of a year. So, obviously it goes without saying, but this is with the acknowledgement that, yes, of course, this is not the most important thing happening right now. I am very aware of that. Part of the reason that I'm sitting alone in the bedroom closet in the dark, there are no lights on in here, is because, we're here to help take care of my mom, who until last week was hospitalized with COVID. So, I don't want anyone to mistake this enthusiasm for news and energy for what's going on in Hollywood as some sort of a sign that I'm ignoring what's going on out there. Trust me, I am not doing that. However, movies are my passion. Film is my passion. And so any flicker of life that says that maybe someday people around the world can get back to seeing films, that we can figure this thing out, that we can do what we need to do. And that's really the most important thing. Do what we need to do. Maybe we would be talking about Tenet a little bit differently right now if everyone had done what they needed to do before, if everyone was doing what they needed to do right now. That's not necessarily the case, and so everyone is having to improvise. But these are the first flickers of light around the world and here in the United States that we are going to find a way through this, that we're going to resume movie going as slowly and safely as we can, but also perhaps one of the first indicators that somewhere at the end of this long, dark tunnel, there is a future where we can all enjoy going to the theaters together again. And if that doesn't get you excited, then I don't know what else does. So that has been this special radio edition of Charts with Dan. Thank you so much for tuning in, for sticking with me throughout this one. And I especially want to thank these patrons. These are some of my producer-level patrons over on Patreon. You can check me out there at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. We're going to be doing Dan's Monthly Movie Club here tomorrow, actually, a live edition, as we're going to be wrapping it up still here. I might not be in the bedroom closet wrapping that up, but we're going to be announcing next month's movie club very soon. We'd love to have you there. But these patrons have really been so key and so instrumental in helping to get me on my feet and with their support and encouragement and advice. So we love to see you over there on Patreon at any level, but I also love to see you here on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening to and looking at these charts, and I will see you next time. And you can't see it, but I'm giving the chest tap. Thanks for watching.